taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we conclude our four-part series on malingering. Can you believe it? We're finally at the end of our four-part series on malingering, and this has been a complete course on deception, symptom magnification, and malingering. And with today's video concludes 6 total videos that we've included in this month's series. So this has been an exhaustive discussion on this sensitive and delicate issue, and it's my opinion and it's my experience that you cannot get this type of discussion anywhere else. How do I know that? I know that because probably like you, I've been to dozens and dozens and dozens of QME and clinical seminars, and nowhere have we ever discussed, at least at this length and this depth, these sensitive issues. But it's my opinion that it's important that we do discuss these issues because these are issues that we face. And in talking about this with many doctors who are new at this type of work that we do really don't know how to handle it. When they get in the face-to-face evaluation with some of their initial examinees early in their career, they become quickly flabbergasted by the level of embellishment and symptom magnification that they encounter. And for some doctors, this becomes a stumbling point and a turning point in their QME career. I've spoken with many doctors who say that they simply don't want to be involved with this kind of work that involves so much fabrication, deception, symptom magnification, and outright malingering. And some doctors simply say that they're not interested in this QME type of work, and I think that's a real shame. What's a better approach, in my opinion, is to become familiar with the issues that surround symptom magnification and malingering and learn how to handle those issues and really come to consider symptom magnification and even less likely or less often malingering, to consider these things as part and parcel of the type of work that we do. Consider these situations of symptom magnification and malingering, consider them to be basically normal for the type of work that we do. Well, if it's normal for the type of work that we do, and we can count on frequently encountering these issues, what's the doctor's obligation? What's our obligation as a qualified medical evaluator? Our obligation is the same. Whether we consider our examinee to be a bona fide examinee, or whether we consider our examinee to be involved in some degree of symptom magnification, embellishment, exaggeration, and possibly malingering, we have the same obligation. What's our obligation? It's very simple. Our obligation is to render opinions and conclusions that are true, that are accurate, and that most closely describe the examinee's condition on the day of our evaluation. So our obligation is universal. It's the same, regardless of the examinee. Our procedures should be consistent, and our opinions and conclusions, regardless of the examinee, should reflect the true, the accurate, and the current condition as most accurately as possible on the date of our evaluation. That's our obligation, independent of the examinee. So if the examinee is involved in symptom magnification, doesn't change our obligation. We still render true and accurate conclusions to the best of our ability on the day of the permanent and stationary or maximum medical improvement declaration. It's the same. So the whole purpose of this 4-week discussion series is to help you to become more comfortable with symptom magnification and to become more comfortable with malingering. According to the AMA guides, and we discussed this in our first session, the AMA guides tell us that anywhere from 10 to 50% of our examinees will exaggerate their symptoms, will magnify their symptoms, will out and outright malinger their symptoms. 10 to 50%. 50%, that's 1 in every 2 people. If we're going to be encountering symptom magnifiers and malingerers, 1 out of every 2 people, we should learn how to handle it. And that's the whole purpose of this series. So let's talk about where we've come so far, and then we'll talk about how we're going to conclude today in our last session. So far, we've handled parts 1 through 3 of this 4-part series. In part 1, we talked about the AMA guides and what the AMA guides say, or the AMA guides philosophy on symptom magnification and malingering. In part 2 of this 4-part series, we talked about the pain behaviors and how pain behaviors serve as a true objective finding for a bona fide condition, and how bona fide conditions carry with them either specific or generalized pain behaviors. And in the absence of pain behaviors, it would lead you to suspect or question the sincerity of the subjective complaints. In part 3 of this 4-part series, we talked about the activities of daily living assessment. The activities of daily living assessment, and how the activities of daily living, and specifically how losses of activities of daily living, should correlate with the presumed, or should correlate with the condition as it's described by the examinee. And because so many doctors do such a poor job on the activities of daily living assessment, they end up many times overrating examinees who otherwise are embellishing and exaggerating their symptoms. In other words, true and accurate conclusions on the examinee's condition are dependent on a couple of things. What are they dependent on? Well, they're dependent on a brilliant physical examination. We're going to talk a little bit more about the physical examination today. So physical examination is critical, of course, right? You agree to that. The physical examination is critical. Well, the activities of daily living assessment is at least as critical. At least as critical. Repeat after me. The activities of daily living assessment is at least as critical as the physical examination in arriving at opinions and conclusions that are true and accurate. And many doctors do a poor job on the activities of daily living assessment. In fact, I was just reviewing a QME report today, this very morning, where the examining doctor had the examinee fill out a checkbox form to indicate difficulties with activities of daily living. Well, when it came time to provide the permanent impairment rating for this particular examinee, the examining doctor provided for additional permanent impairment within a range of impairments that are provided for in the AMA guides. He selected the higher value from the range due to what the examinee described as difficulties with activities of daily living. Now, how do we know that the examinee has difficulty with those activities of daily living? How do we know? How would you know? Would you simply accept responses on a checkbox form as bona fide indicators of losses of activities of daily living? Or because the AMA guides tell us that up to 50% of examinees exaggerate their symptoms, do you think that we should investigate and explore the examinee's descriptions of loss of activities of daily living? Yes, we should explore it. We should investigate it. We should question the examinee about their losses of activities of daily living to arrive at the true losses. And many examinees, and I'm sure you'll find this to be true based on your own experience, of examining injured workers, many examinees do not have true losses of activities of daily living. Despite what they say, they still do everything that they want and need to do. They bathe themselves, they dress themselves, they drive themselves wherever they want to go, whenever they want to go. They travel. I've had examinees tell me they've traveled all over the world while they're on total temporary disability. They're able to travel and handle airports and concourses and long-term parking and luggage. They're able to have sexual activities despite the fact that they say they have trouble with sexual activities. They're able to do everything that they want to do. They have no losses, and we talked about that in part 3 of this series. So that brings us today to part 4 of this series, and today I want to talk to you about your physical exam and how to incorporate the Waddell's maneuvers into your routine physical examination. Now you might wonder to yourself, should I include Waddell's maneuvers in my physical exam? I mean, does that seem like I'm trying to trap the examinee? Or does that seem like I don't trust the examinee or I don't believe the examinee? If I do Waddell's maneuvers, is that ethical? And all of these questions might be going through your mind. Well, I want to talk to you today about the Waddell's maneuvers. And before we get into the Waddell's maneuvers and the nuts and bolts as to how to perform those maneuvers, I want to spend some time very briefly first to establish the necessity of performing the Waddell's maneuvers. So by the time we're done with that section, you will feel comfortable incorporating the Waddell's maneuvers into your routine physical examination protocol. So that's where we're going today. Today is all about the now famous non-organic physical signs of Waddell. So I'm going to go grab some references that relate to what we're talking about today. And I want you to settle in and get comfortable for about a 20 to 25 minute discussion about the Waddell signs. So I look forward to being back with you here in just a minute as we conclude our 4-part series on symptom magnification, deception, and malingering, with today's discussion focusing around the Waddell's signs. Guides with me, as well as a couple of other references. So let's begin now to get into the Waddell signs. And the first thing I want to discuss with you is whether or not it's necessary for us to include the Waddell signs and other non-physiologic or non-organic examination maneuvers into our routine protocol. Why should we do this? Should we do this? If we should do it, why should we do it? And how do we do it? So the first thing I want to talk to you about regarding the Waddell signs is the necessity of implementing and integrating these physical examination maneuvers into your routine protocol. It's my opinion that these physical examination maneuvers should be included in your routine protocol. Now, the Waddell signs are specifically related to lumbar spine and low back pain cases. But the Waddell signs are simply metaphors for physical examination maneuvers that are non-organic or non-physiologic examination maneuvers. And what that means is that these physical examination maneuvers should not reproduce pain, should not reproduce the examinee's pain. And so therefore, if we have an examinee who reports pain with these maneuvers, those reports of pain qualify as non-organic signs, non-organic findings. Now, non-organic findings need to be distinguished from organic findings. And organic findings are those physical examination findings that are associated with a bona fide, organic, true pathologic condition of either the lumbar spine or any other body part. So, because the Waddell signs are associated with examination of the lumbar spine, it's important to realize that these are not the only non-physiologic examination maneuvers, and you can come up with and craft your own non-physiologic examination maneuvers for any part of the spine. So the Waddell's maneuvers are simply a metaphor for your entire physical examination. So, but for the purposes of today's discussion, we're focused on the Waddell signs and we're focused on the lumbar spine. So let's talk about the necessity of incorporating these physical examination maneuvers into your routine protocol. And to establish the necessity of this, I want to review with you a couple of quotes, one from the AMA guides and one from the 2001 Physician's Guide. Now, in Chapter 18 of the AMA guides, they spend considerable time talking about how to assess the credibility of our examinee. And I'm sure you're familiar with Chapter 18. So it's important that we assess credibility. How do we assess credibility? Let's establish the necessity of assessing our examinee's credibility. Well, it says on page 581 of the AMA guides, there's a section entitled Credibility of the Individual. It says here, physicians routinely assess the credibility of individuals in the course of their clinical work, such as in our clinical practice. This kind of assessment, meaning the credibility assessment, is particularly important in the context of rating pain-related impairments. Examinee says, I have pain. Because the ratings depend on verbal and nonverbal behaviors of people, which can be largely or entirely subjective. Verbal and nonverbal behaviors of people that are at least partly under voluntary control. Although there are no definite rules for assessing credibility, this section in the AMA Guide, section 18.4, the Behavioral Confounders, discusses several issues that a physician should consider when making a judgment about a person's credibility. The key question the examiner should ask is, do the limitations that an individual describes and demonstrates accurately, let me say that again, accurately reflect the burden of illness he or she bears during everyday activities. And that's our obligation as the qualified medical evaluators, is to be accurate. So in order to arrive at accurate opinions and conclusions, it's necessary for us to assess the credibility of individuals who provide for us many subjective complaints, also known as self-reports. We need to assess the credibility of the self-reports. Okay? So the AMA guides require that we make some sort of an assessment as to the examinee's credibility. And we'll talk about how to do that. That's the whole purpose of today's discussion with the Waddell signs. But let me give you a couple of more quotes and a couple of more examples of the necessity of assessing credibility and the necessity of incorporating these maneuvers into our routine protocol. I have here a quote from the 2001 Physician's Guide. And this is from page 45 of the 2001 Physician's Guide, where they're talking about pain and disability. Pain and disability. They say here that although fraud and malingering are uncommon, over-elaboration, symptom magnification, and embellishment often characterize pain complaints. They often characterize pain complaints. What's the opposite of often? The opposite of often is seldom. They say that over-elaboration, symptom magnification, and embellishment often characterize pain complaints. Therefore, the credibility of the injured worker must be assessed. Says it right here in the 2001's Physician's Guide. So we have a responsibility and an obligation to assess our examinee's credibility. So that's well and good. Many doctors make a deliberate attempt to assess credibility. Some doctors do a half-hearted attempt. Some doctors make no attempt to assess the credibility at all, and they simply accept verbatim as gospel the self-reports of examinees. Well, guess what? The parties involved in the workers' compensation claim, meaning the claims administrator, applicant attorneys, defense attorneys, are increasingly not accepting of doctors simply believing word for word as gospel the self-reports of examinees. And the parties are attempting to take more and more control over the physical examination procedure, and they're increasingly demanding that we make a deliberate assessment of the examinee's credibility. So let me just give you a couple of examples of that through cover letters that I've received from the parties. And I have for you here, 3 cover letters that are exemplary, meaning they're examples of the parties demanding a credibility assessment. Now, I have here cover letters from each of one claims administrator, one applicant attorney, and one defense attorney. And these are all on different examinees. I simply provide these to you to show you the spectrum of parties who are demanding that we do a credibility assessment. It's not simply limited to the defense attorney. It's not simply limited to the claims administrator. Even the applicant attorney is requesting and demanding a credibility assessment, because nobody wants to be involved with examinees who are not credible. Okay? So, have here, the first one is a cover letter from the claims administrator. Okay? And I'll cover up the insurance company logo right there. Okay? This is a cover letter from claims administrator. Goes through a bunch of historic information about the nature of the claim. And then it gets into the specific issues to be addressed in the comprehensive medical report. And all the way down here in section D, and I have it highlighted, you can see here, this is section D, it says, are there risk factors for potential symptom magnification, somatization, or malingering, question mark. And just, they go through several different concerns about symptom magnification and embellishment, and then they simply get right down to the brass tacks of the question. They ask, is the patient's presentation consistent with observable clinical presentation? For example, is there a need for intermittent posture change? Is there difficulty removing clothing? Is there a withdrawal response to light skin touch? Is there a variation in response to the straight leg raise test while supine versus seated? Is there low back pain with passive rotation at the hip while standing? They're discussing here the Waddell signs. These are the Waddell signs, and we're going to elaborate on the Waddell signs, but these are some of them. They're saying, is there non-dermatologic, no, I'm sorry, well, they say dermatologic, they mean dermatomal. Is there non-dermatomal sensory loss on pinwheel testing? Is there demonstrable effort on test? Is there exaggerated grimacing, etc.? Has the patient demonstrated maximum effort with active and passive range of motion tests? What is the claims administrator asking for with these questions? What are they asking? They're asking, is this a sincere examinee? Did the examinee produce a sincere effort on physical exam? Are your physical exam findings upon which you're going to provide opinions and conclusions, are they accurate? Or do we have a bogus symptom magnifying examinee? The claims administrator is demanding that we perform the Waddells and other maneuvers to assess the credibility of the examinee. They're demanding it by way of cover letter. And I want you to pay close attention to the cover letters that you receive and tell me if indeed you notice this as an increasing trend. The parties are demanding our assessment. I have here a cover letter from applicant attorney. Where is that one? Have here, let's go on to the cover letter by defense attorney here. I have a cover letter from applicant attorney, which I'll retrieve in just a second. This is cover letter from defense attorney, and I'll cover up the letterhead there. And again, it goes through some historic information, and it gets into the pertinent questions that they want me to address. And then down here I have this one highlighted. It says, please also discuss whether symptom magnification or malingering are indicated here. And then they raise an example that they consider to be highly suspicious and indicative of symptom magnification and malingering. So they're asking for a discussion, a full discussion regarding whether or not, in this case me, whether or not I suspect symptom magnification or malingering, or whether symptom magnification or malingering could be present with this examinee. They're asking for a specific discussion. What they want to see in my report is a heading entitled symptom magnification and or malingering, and then a full discussion of it. They're asking for it in the cover letter. Okay? Let's see if we can find applicant attorney cover letter. Here it is. Okay. Have a cover letter here from applicant attorney. Okay. Now, can you believe it? Even the applicant attorneys are requesting that we assess the credibility. Why? Because applicant attorneys don't want to stand up and defend examinees or injured workers who aren't bona fide. It makes everybody look bad, and they don't want to stand up there and pound their fist about how their examinee requires benefits when they're not a bona fide examinee. They don't want to do that. So here's a cover letter from applicant attorney. Again, goes through some historic information, and then it poses several different questions for me. And then on the third page, and I have these highlighted right here, it says, are the applicant's subjective complaints supported by objective findings? Is there objective support for the examinee's subjective self-reports? Please explain the rationale for your conclusions. And then get this. This comes directly from the applicant attorney. He says, Please perform a physical examination documenting all pertinent positive, pertinent negative, and pertinent non-physiologic findings, period. As always, your conclusions must be supportable. The applicant attorney is asking for my findings on the Waddell's and other non-physiologic examination maneuvers. They're asking for a specific discussion as to whether or not this examinee is credible. So it's required both by the AMA guides, by the 2001 Physician's Guide, and increasingly it's being required by the parties that we not overlook the credibility assessment of our examinee. So it's required. It's required that we introduce, implement, and integrate non-physiologic or non-organic examination maneuvers into our routine protocol. So let's just talk about this for a minute, and then I'll describe the Waddell signs for you. So when you integrate non-physiologic examination maneuvers into your routine protocol, they should be interspersed and intermingled amongst other physical examination maneuvers. When you perform the non-physiologic examination maneuvers, you should not suggest, you should not lead the patient, you should not introduce suggestion into the procedure. You should simply go about your business performing these non-physiologic examination maneuvers just as you would your other normal physical examination maneuvers. You do not want to lead or introduce suggestion into the examinee. That's an area where doctor bias can influence the outcome or the findings of these maneuvers. So you simply want to integrate these into your routine protocol and go through your routine protocol just as you normally do your normal physical examination maneuvers. Now, by very definition, the non-organic or non-physiologic examination maneuvers should not produce pain. They do not reproduce or stimulate the painful body part. Now, let's contrast non-organic physical examination maneuvers with actual physical examination maneuvers that can provoke pain, that can stimulate the painful body part. Now, with non-organic examination maneuvers, the examinee's response is entirely subjective. It's not accompanied by true positive physical exam findings because these maneuvers should not reproduce pain. They don't stimulate the active or painful body part. So with our routine physical examination maneuvers, in the presence of bona fide pathology, we would expect to observe true positive objective findings. True positive objective findings are missing with the non-physiologic examination maneuvers because they're not true examination maneuvers. So you need to pay close attention for both components of a positive finding. Both components of a positive finding include the examinee's subjective report of reproduction of pain and also the true positive objective finding that you would expect to accompany a true painful bona fide condition. And the non-physiologic examination maneuvers are missing the true objective finding. The true objective finding is omitted from the response because there's not truly a reproduction of pain. They're very interesting. These maneuvers should not produce pain. Okay? So let's talk about the Waddell's maneuvers. And I'm not going to go into these in great depth, but I'm just going to provide a little bit of philosophy about the Waddell's maneuvers so that you can become comfortable in using them in your everyday examinations. So Waddell described 5 different types of physical examination maneuvers, or 5 different categories of physical examination maneuvers. And within these 5 categories, some of the categories have a couple of different testing procedures that we do, but there's 5 basic categories. The categories are tenderness assessments, simulation maneuvers, distraction maneuvers, regional disturbances, and overreactions. And Waddell stated that overreactions were the single most important of the non-organic findings. So always pay particular attention and be acutely attuned to your examinee's reactions to examination maneuvers. Okay? And be particularly acutely attuned for the possibility of what you would consider to be overreactions to the physical examination maneuvers. Okay, so with the tenderness assessments, Waddell described 2 different types of procedures. He talked about the assessment of superficial tenderness and also the assessment of non-anatomic tenderness. So with superficial tenderness, and remember these relate to the lumbar spine. So with superficial tenderness, what Waddell did is he simply took the skin of the lumbar spine, the paraspinal skin. This would be the skin along both sides of the spinous processes of the lumbar spine. And he did a light pinch wherein he lifted the skin from the surface of the spine, somewhat like so. Sometimes this can be done along the paraspinal fat, along the lateral aspect of the lumbar spine. So with superficial pinch of the skin, we're stimulating only the skin. This is not a mechanical test for the lumbar spine discs, the lumbar spine joints. There's no muscle contraction of the paraspinal or deep spinal stabilizing muscles. It's simply a skin level examination maneuver. Now this should not reproduce lumbar spine radiculopathy. This should not reproduce lumbar spine facet-mediated pain. This should not reproduce chronic lumbar myalgia pain. It's simply a skin pinch maneuver. And Waddell stated that if the examinee reported a reproduction of lower back pain, he considered that to be a non-organic finding, not associated with true pathology of the lumbar spine, because this maneuver should not reproduce lumbar spine pain. So that's the superficial tenderness. He also talked about non-anatomic tenderness, wherein with light palpation of the lumbar spine, the examinee reported pain in a non-anatomic distribution. So what's a non-anatomic distribution? A non-anatomic distribution is distribution of pain, number one, not related to any specific dermatome, not related to any specific lumbar spine, spinal nerve root level. It's non-dermatomal pain. It's pain that's not isolated to any particular tissue or any particular structure. So for example, with facet-mediated pain, say for example the examinee has facet-mediated pain from L4, direct pressure, palpation pressure over the L4 lumbar spine facets is a localized pain emanating from the lumbar spine facets. Pain emanating from a lumbar muscular strain is a localized pain associated with the muscle. With non-anatomic pain, Waddell described pain that's widespread, it's diffuse, it's non-dermatomal, and it's not related to any particular structure of the lumbar spine. It's unrelated to any particular structure. It's widespread. Okay? And he considered non-anatomic tenderness to be a non-organic physical sign. Now, let's contrast that with what you would consider to be a bona fide true objective finding on lumbar spine palpation. Let's say, for example, you have an examinee who has a hot intervertebral disc or a hot zygapophyseal joint at L5. When you come along and you palpate and you reproduce and stimulate that painful body part, what is the true objective finding associated with that pain? The true objective finding typically involves some form of the apprehension response or the flexor withdrawal response. Typically, we refer to that as a jump sign. The examinee will give you a jump sign, and the jump sign is reflexive. The jump sign constitutes the true objective finding on pain that's reproduced by palpation. Now, with superficial tenderness and non-anatomic tenderness, there's no objective finding. There's no reflexive withdrawal. There's no evasive action. There's no apprehension sign. There's no jump sign because there's no actual pain. Okay? So that makes non-organic physical signs relatively easy to detect. First of all, this should not be the reproduction of pain. The reports of pain should not be widespread, diffuse, and not localized to any particular structure. And there should be, and there is no true objective finding. Okay? Now, the second category of physical examination and non-organic physical signs that Waddell described are the simulation maneuvers. And there's many simulation maneuvers. And you can come up with your own simulation maneuvers for every part of the body. Every component of the physical exam can have its own simulation maneuvers. But Waddell described two basic simulation maneuvers. He described the axial loading test and the truncal rotation test, neither of which involve any movement of the lumbar spine, and so therefore should not reproduce pain of the lumbar spine. So with axial loading, you simply stand behind the examinee and apply pressure down the vertex of their skull, compressing the cervical spine. This in no way loads up the lumbar spine, but examinees don't know this. And so many times examinees will report the reproduction of lower back pain with axial loading of the cervical spine. Now, if there was true pain, we would expect to see a true positive objective finding. But because this maneuver does not load the lumbar spine and does not cause movement at the lumbar spine, it does not reproduce pain at the lumbar spine. And so therefore, there is no true positive objective finding. Okay? With truncal rotation test, Waddell described a maneuver wherein the examinee's upper torso, the shoulders and the upper body are rotated. They are rotated en bloc as a unit. So when you rotate the torso en bloc, including the lumbar spine, the rotation occurs at the acetabulum. The movement occurs at the hip joint. The rotation occurs not in the lumbar spine. It occurs at the hip joints. And so therefore there's no loading, there's no movement, there's no contraction of lumbar paraspinal muscles. The lumbar spine remains relatively or completely inert during this physical examination maneuver. And so this maneuver should not reproduce lumbar spine pain. But examinees don't know this, especially if you integrate this maneuver into your other physical examination maneuvers. It should be a seamless integration, and you just go through these as if these are all physical examination maneuvers versus non-organic maneuvers. So the examinee doesn't know this, and if the examinee reports pain or reproduction of symptoms on this maneuver, Waddell considered that to be a non-organic finding. Okay? And there are other simulation maneuvers for the lumbar spine. I frequently use a maneuver known as the Gordon-Wellberry ankle toe test. And the Gordon-Wellberry ankle toe test is a takeoff on the straight leg raise test, and it's a takeoff on the Braggart's maneuver. And these maneuvers can be done in sequence. The reason to introduce the Gordon-Wellberry ankle toe test is because many examinees are familiar with the straight leg raise maneuver. They see this maneuver being performed on YouTube, and they do their research prior to coming to their impairment evaluations, and they're familiar with the straight leg raise maneuver. So imagine you have an examinee who's reporting lumbar spine radiculopathy, and you perform the straight leg raise maneuver, and at 45 degrees of elevation, they report, pain down the back of my leg, into my foot. These are reports of pain consistent with radiculopathy. Now, this report of pain should be accompanied by a true objective finding, correct? What would that true objective finding be? That true objective finding would involve some sort of reflexive shortening of the lumbar spine nerve roots, right? The straight leg raise test lengthens the lumbar spine nerve roots, so the examinee would reflexively shorten the lumbar spine nerve roots. That constitutes the true objective finding. Well, this maneuver is typically followed up by the Braggart's maneuver, wherein we lower the straight leg raise position slightly below the point at which the examinee reported pain. So if they reported pain at 45 degrees, we would lower it down to 40 degrees and then dorsiflex the ankle and toes in order to further stretch the lumbar spine nerve roots. And the examinee, in the presence of bona fide radiculopathy, the examinee will tell you, that reproduces their pain again, and there should be some form of a true objective finding. Well, it's at this point that you can introduce the Gordon-Wellberry toe and ankle test, wherein you drop the foot down to the table, you maintain 90 degrees of flexion at the knee, and then you strongly dorsiflex the ankle and the toes. So, in other words, you've reduced the stretch on the lumbar spine nerve roots by flexing the examinee's knee, and then you repeat the dorsiflexion of the ankle. Now, this should not reproduce lumbar spine nerve root pain because the tension on the lumbar spine nerve roots has been relieved. But examinees don't know this. And many times the examinee will report, yes, that reproduces their pain. But you will notice that there is no true positive objective finding because the maneuver actually does not cause pain. Okay? So the Gordon-Wellberry toe and ankle maneuver is another of the simulation maneuvers, and there are many, many. Okay? Waddell also described the distraction maneuvers, and he described the seated straight leg raise test as the most useful and the most important of the distraction maneuvers. So with the seated straight leg raise test, we're comparing the examinee's response to the supine straight leg raise testing response. They should be the same because of the same maneuver. But in order to make the maneuver more subtle, Waddell described several ways to perform the seated straight leg raise component of this comparison. So while casually talking to the seated examinee, Waddell began his examination procedures So, for example, with lumbar spine radiculopathy, we would expect the examinee to report pain in a dermatomal distribution. For an L5 radiculopathy, that would be pain down the lateral calf and to the top of the foot. For S1 radiculopathy, that would be pain down the lateral aspect of the calf and into the side and bottom of the foot in a dermatomal distribution. Well, with regional disturbances, examinees will report pain not in a dermatomal distribution, but more into what they perceive to be body part distribution. So they'll say things like, I feel pain in my leg below the knee, the whole leg. I feel pain everywhere in all of the parts of my leg below the knee. Or they'll say that they have pain in their entire leg, in the entirety of the leg. And you question them and say, well, where specifically is the pain? And they'll say, well, the whole leg. It's the whole leg and my whole foot. Or sometimes people will say, it's the whole lower half of my body. Or they'll say it's the whole left-hand side of my body. These are reports of pain that are not consistent with known neurology, non-dermatomal regional disturbances. Similarly, examinees will report weaknesses in non-myotomal distributions as well. They'll report weaknesses to multiple muscle groups, typically, again, regionally described, such as weakness entirely below the elbow in all muscles below the elbow, or weakness in the entirety of the arm, or weakness in the entirety of the right half of the body. And on physical exam testing for strength, they will provide for you this sort of ratchety cogwheel giving way type of pain that's vastly different from the gradual weakness of radiculopathy weakness, and vastly different from the spasticity weakness of myelopathy weakness. So Waddell described this as regional disturbances of sensation, meaning pain, and weakness that are not consistent with known anatomy. And then finally, Waddell described the overreactions. Overreactions are examinee pain behaviors that are seemingly out of proportion to the examination stimulus. And he stated that overreactions were the most important, most reliable, and most essential to be acutely aware of during your examination procedures. So that's tenderness, that's simulation maneuvers, that's distraction maneuvers, that's regional disturbances maneuvers, and assessment for overreactions. So what do these signs mean? What do these signs mean? Well, Waddell said that the presence of any 3 out of 5 were strongly suspicious for non-organic causes of pain. What are non-organic causes? Non-organic causes are causes that are not associated with true tissue pathology, true pathology of any part of the lumbar spine. He said if any 3 out of 5 are present, it's strongly suspicious for non-organic causes. Well, over the years, and this Waddell's study was published in 1980, over the years, the Waddell signs have been criticized and have been discussed by many authors, and the conclusions of the Waddell's paper have been criticized. But what's universally accepted at this late date, 2015, is that the presence of Waddell's signs seem to most strongly suggest and predict a poor outcome for treatment. So the presence of the Waddell signs in that sense gives us an indication as to the type of response that we can expect our examinee to provide to treatment. In fact, the presence of the Waddell signs seems to be an excellent predictor of a poor treatment outcome. So this may help you in making your recommendations for further and or future medical care if you detect the presence of the Waddell signs on your physical examination. So on an individual basis, what do these signs mean? What do they mean? Does the presence of a single finding on non-physiologic maneuvers mean anything? I once was in deposition and I described two positive non-physiologic exam findings. And the applicant attorney asked me, he said, well, how many positive findings did you find? And I said, 2. And he said, and why did you conclude that that constituted symptom magnification? Didn't Waddell require 3, he said? And he raised a valid point, and the point is that in isolation, these maneuvers, they don't mean anything. We can't simply conclude that we have an examinee who's magnifying their symptoms on the basis of 1 maneuver, on the basis of 2 maneuvers, on the basis of 3 maneuvers. What we do is we assess the credibility of the individual using an entire constellation of interview questioning, of observations of pain behaviors, of non-physiologic examination maneuvers. It's the entire constellation of our observations that form our assessment of the credibility of the individual. No one maneuver means anything, so don't hang your hat on any one of these maneuvers. Now, I've had many doctors tell me that they can just get a feel for the examinee where something about the examinee doesn't feel right, something they're not comfortable with. They can't exactly describe it in words, but they have a feeling that they're just not convinced that the examinee is credible. This is the perfect opportunity to introduce the non-organic signs of Waddell into your physical examination maneuver. And if you're feeling, the feeling that you have, the uncomfortable feeling that you have, is corroborated by positive non-organic findings, well then that would contribute to your assessment that the examinee may have mixed credibility, okay? So it's the entire constellation. We don't simply rely on the Waddell's maneuvers, and I recommend that you not do that, because that is something that certainly will be questioned either by supplemental report or in deposition, because as I said, over the years, the Waddell signs have been criticized in terms of their reliability to exclude true organic causes of lower back pain. So doctors, I hope this helps you. And the whole purpose of this series has been to help you become a better evaluator. And we become better evaluators by becoming more and more accurate in our opinions and conclusions. We become better and better at providing opinions and conclusions that are an accurate reflection of the truth. And I don't know about you, but that's my whole focus and my whole motive for being a qualified medical evaluator, is to help the parties arrive at the truth. And throughout the course of this series, we've talked about the potential likelihood that examinees could present to us untruthfully. You can expect it, you can anticipate it, you should prepare for it, you should be comfortable with it. But that does not change your job. Do not let the examinee throw you off course. Regardless of the examinee, you have the same obligation, and that is to provide opinions and conclusions that are true, that are accurate, and that are the closest possible representation of the examinee's true condition as possible. Now, none of us are perfect, but that's our quest, is to provide opinions and conclusions that are as close as possible to the truth and that are the most accurate opinions and conclusions as possible. And the purpose of this discussion on symptom magnification and malingering is to help you get those factors out of the way so that you can focus on what's true. On what's true. What's the examinee's true limitations to activities of daily living? What's their true function by way of physical examination? Not their overstated limitations or understated function. No, our purpose is to get to the true function and the true limitations. And this material goes a long way toward helping us navigate through the sea of examinees that we see over the course of a career, and gives us some general principles upon which we can rely in order to carry on with the work that we do in providing our opinions and conclusions. So doctors, I hope this helps you. This has been a fabulous series for me to present to you, and I appreciate all the feedback that I've received from the many doctors over the past 4 weeks. I realize that this is some controversial topics, but I felt it necessary to go into this discussion with you. So I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope you've taken to heart many of the topics that we've discussed throughout this series. So I want to conclude by saying that this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. It's been my pleasure to be with you today and over the course of this 4-part series. I look forward to being with you on future videos as well. And for now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.